Chapter 6 in the Boglehead textbook deals with how much do you need to save. I just got a new keyboard and I'm not quite used to it yet. So basically, most people do not have any idea how much money they need to save to accomplish a certain goal. The goal that I'm going to discuss in this chapter is not surprisingly retirement because it's just the biggest expense you're probably ever going to have. So it takes a lot of planning. You need to start early. You need to invest in securities that are going to earn a nice rate of return in excess of inflation. And most people do not plan for that. So they don't know how much to save. They don't know how to start saving. They don't know where to place their money. Like, should they put it in stocks? Should they put it in bonds? Should they keep it in a certificate of deposit? Should they put it in their savings account? And so, hopefully, by the end of this course, you'll know the answer to all of those questions. But there are various factors that influence how much you need to save for retirement. The first is obviously the amount you save every month, let's say, periodically. The more you save, the more it will grow to. The sooner you start, the more it will grow to. So, your current age, not the current age. If you start saving when you're in your 20s, you'll be far more likely to reach your goals versus if you wait until your 40s. And many people postpone saving for retirement until they're in their 40s and even later. And then they go, holy cow, I have to save $150,000 a year and I only make $70,000 a year. So eventually, at some point, it becomes impossible to save enough money to live well if you wait too long. But if you start when you're in your 20s, it should be certainly a doable thing. The age you plan to retire will influence how much you need to save. If you start saving when you're in your 20s, it might be possible to retire when you're in your 50s if you want to. Um, it's at least nice to have the luxury of knowing that you could afford to retire in your 50s. Other people save so little or don't save at all and discover they are going to have to work until they die. And speaking of dying, life expectancy. So, if you're healthy and you retire at 65, you could easily live another 3 decades. And 3 decades of money, it's expensive to live for 3 decades without generating income from working. So you're going to have to save a few $1,000,000 to be able to afford that. So basically, how long do your retirement funds need to last? Also, do you want to leave an estate? Or do you just want to be able to support yourself? Like, I know I'd like to leave my children some money, and I'd also like to leave some money to Western to fund a scholarship. So I would like to leave an estate, and I've built that into my plans. The expected, I should put rate of return, the expected rate of return on our investments. Like if I can only earn 3% because I'm unwilling to invest in risky securities, I'm going to have to save a whole lot more myself and probably work for a lot longer than if I'm willing to take on riskier investments and earn potentially 8%. The expected rate of inflation. If inflation is minimal and is, let's say, 1% a year, and I can earn 8% a year, then my wealth is going to grow at a rate of about 7% a year above inflation, which would be great. But if inflation is 4% a year and I only earn 8% a year, then my wealth is only going to grow at 4% above inflation, so my purchasing power increase won't be nearly as great. Nobody knows what inflation will be over the next 50 years, but it's fairly likely that it's going to be close to what it has been for the past 50 years, which is about 3%. Another issue is, can you expect an inheritance prior to retirement? And how much is that likely to be? So, I mean, a lot of people say you really shouldn't plan on an inheritance, but if it's fairly certain, then I don't think there's anything wrong with building it into your plan, but realize it might not be completely certain. Like if I live till I'm 95, my kids won't get an inheritance because I don't have enough money to that's not that's coming I probably don't have enough money to live till I'm 95, but I'm not in great health. Both my parents died when they were relatively young from health issues, and so I probably won't live past 85. And if I die at that time, my kids will get a decent inheritance. But if I live another decade, I'm going to have to spend that money I was going to give them as an inheritance. And then other sources of income that you might have during retirement. The main one that I'm talking about is Social Security. And for a long time, I didn't build Social Security into my planning, but because I was really just worried it wasn't going to be there by the time I retired. But I'll probably retire in, gosh, about 2030. And actually, before then, probably. And Social Security should still be there for me. It won't be fully funded. Experts say it'll be funded at about 75% around that time. And so I have allocated for Social Security of about 75% of what I'm promised in my plans. And actually, let me show you. I forgot to get this spreadsheet open, but Social Security has an interesting website. I'm trying to type the word calculator. Here we go. You can actually go to the Social Security website and sign up for an account using your Social Security number, and it will tell you exactly how much they have on record as you're having made from your jobs. They'll project what Social Security payment you should receive at certain ages. And there are a variety of ages that are important in terms of Social Security. And let me just do this. This is not with my actual numbers, but they have also a quick calculator. And with the quick calculator, you enter your date of birth. So I'll go ahead and enter that. So I was born on August 27th, 1965. And then you enter how much you made during the current year. And I'm not going to enter an actual real number for me. So I'll enter 75,000. Um, and then I can say, do I want to see the amounts that they're going to tell me in today's dollars, or do I want them to be inflated, meaning the actual physical dollar amount I should receive at certain ages. So I'm going to do the inflated dollars. So if I retire when I'm 62 years old in 1 month in 2027, the full benefit that I would receive is $2,429. Of course, they don't think they're going to be fully funded. Uh, Actually, they still should be fully funded by 2027. It's the mid 2030s when Social Security projects it won't be fully funded. So I should get approximately $2,429 a month. If I wait until my what they call their full retirement age, which is 67 for me, it's a little bit more for you if you're younger than I am. I will get so if I don't start collecting Social Security at age 62, I wait 5 more years and start collecting at age 67, I'll get quite a bit more. 4,000 a month. Now, if I think I'm only going to live until I'm 70, then I'd probably start collecting at age 62 because it makes more sense to collect less, but for a longer period of time, it would add up to more money altogether. And if I postponed even later and waited until I was 70 years old to start collecting, I should get $5,538 a month. But this is the point in time when Social Security projects that they won't be fully funded, so I doubt I really would get 5,500 a month. Remember, these are in year 2035 dollars, year 2032 dollars, and year 2027 dollars. So they're building inflation into these numbers. So if I think I could live off $5,538 when I'm 70, I technically wouldn't need to save any money for retirement, but I'm pretty sure I cannot. Because remember, this is at this point 20 years into the future, so there's a lot of inflation built into that number. So basically, $5,500 in 2035 won't buy nearly as much as it would buy today. So, in your case, given that you're probably in your 20s, if not a little bit younger, I wouldn't rely heavily on Social Security. I maybe use the likelihood of it being 50% funded instead of 100% funded by the time you retire, maybe even less than 50%. Now, you can see it's going to be difficult to actually come up with numbers that you're sure are going to happen with most of these variables. Like, you don't know what inflation's going to be. You don't know what rate of return you're going to earn on your investment. Now, you can know if you wish to leave an estate, but whether or not you will be able to may not be known until you get a lot closer to retirement. You don't know how long you're going to live. Now, you can plan to retire at a certain age, and you do know how old you are. But you should try to nail down these different factors. So I just want to go through some of them, just point out a few things. The first, your retirement age. Oops. I mean, I know lots of people who would love to retire. I have a few friends in their uh, 60s, late 60s, and well, I guess I have a few enemies too. Now that I think about it, my ex mother in law, for one, she made decent money in the 1980s. I know she was making about 80,000 a year. If you adjust for inflation, that's not a bad income. She didn't put a penny aside for retirement ever. And now at the age of 74, I believe, she's still having to work, and she can't afford to do repairs to her house or anything like that. So, your retirement age, I guess that was just a sad story I was telling you. I don't want you to turn out like my mother in law. So that's one reason I'm teaching this class. I want y'all to learn how to be able to predict your needs financially and choose good investments to actually be able to afford to retire. So your retirement age depends on, here I'm going to put depends on, if you can you afford to retire. Just last night I was doing some spreadsheeting, and I was looking to see if I could afford to retire a little like 3 years sooner than I had planned to. And it turns out I probably can, so yay for me. I'm glad. It depends on your health. One reason I would like to retire just a little bit early is because I know a lot of people who retired when they were 65 and then passed away not long after that and didn't have many years of carefree retirement to enjoy. I don't want to be in that situation. I'd like to retire while I'm still young enough to and healthy enough to do some things. Also, many people say I can't afford to retire, so I'm going to keep working. But either their health precludes them from working, they're just physically not able to, or they find that employment is not available for them. Many people got laid off during the what is it, the Great Recession of 2008. And they were at the age where it was difficult for them to compete with younger people. So they were 50 when they got laid off and they couldn't find jobs. They ended up retiring against their will, in essence. So you also need to plan for how long you're going to need or be in retirement, how much money you're going to need to finance that. In 1900, the average, the age at which, I guess there's no pleasant way to say this, the age at which the average American passed away was 55. And so in 1900, people never ever planned to save money for retirement because people didn't retire in the same way that they do now. They basically worked until they died. But now, I mean, I know a few people who have lived to be in their mid 90s. So they retired when they were 60 or 65. They had about 3 decades of retirement that they needed to finance. So, due to medical advances, many people are living until into their 90s. You need to plan for that financially. And maybe by the time, I mean, because y'all are much younger than I am, probably maybe people in your generation will live into their hundreds. I mean, obviously people do now, but I'm just saying a larger proportion of people will live into their hundreds because of medical advances. In that sense, it makes sense to, if you can, to work perhaps into your 70s so that you'll still just have to finance about 3 decades of retirement. Now, I do plan to leave an estate for my children, but like I mentioned earlier, if I live longer than about 85, I'm going to have to start spending that money I'd planned to leave them. So, my first task is to take care of my needs during retirement. Oops. Basically, I don't want to be a burden to my children financially. I don't want to be an emotional burden to them either. Hopefully, they don't think I am. Sorry, that just amused me. Um, so, I don't want to be a financial burden to my children. So, I make absolutely certain that I save money for retirement and have been for a very long time so that I will have plenty of money to survive on, even should I live to be 90 years old. So I want to take care of myself first, but as an aside, that's also going to benefit my children. And then I've also informed them that I do plan to leave a little bit of money to Western to help fund a scholarship. Now, if I live longer than I had originally planned, because I do want to leave some money to my kids just to make their life a little bit easier, I would not leave the money to some money to Western. And I just want to point out something that you might read in the news. There's something called the sandwich generation, which is people who are in their about their 40s. They have kids that they have to support, younger kids. And then they also have parents who haven't yet passed away. And those parents typically didn't save enough money for retirement. And so financially, they are having to ask their own children to help them. So these 40-year-old people are sandwiched between two generations, their own children and their parents. And both of those generations are tugging at their financial needs. Then both of those generations need support from the 40-year-olds. I don't um, want my kids to be that way. So, to avoid that, I am saving money to support myself during retirement. Now, I want to talk about estimating future returns on investments. And I'm going to record a separate video to go into this into a lot more detail. But let's your rate of return that you can earn has a huge impact on how much your retirement account will grow to be worth by the end of your working years. And I just wanted to show you how to very briefly do some math that you'll need to know for that video that I'm going to do. later. But let me put together a quick little description that explains it. So let's say you've invested in or three different mutual funds. Let me see if I can get this to center. There we go. So you've invested in three different mutual funds that I'm going to name Fund 1 through Fund 3. And maybe these funds are a combination of stocks and bonds. Maybe they're all stocks. We'll look at individual funds in the next video. But let's say that you've got 40% of your money in the first fund. Oh, I don't know, 20%. No, we'll go 30. No, 25% in the next fund, and you're only invested in three funds, so you've got 65% in the first two funds. That means 35% has to be in that last fund. Then you'll have to estimate your expected return on those three funds. I'll show you how to do that in a future video. But let's say the first fund is all stock or all equity, and I'm going to just do that and hopefully it works. And then the second fund is all bonds. So basically it's lower risk. It's going to probably generate a less return. This one's higher risk. It's going to generate hopefully a higher return. And let's say that fund 3 is a hybrid. It's got some stocks in it and some bonds. So it's going to generate probably a return somewhere in the middle between fund 1 and 2. I'll show you in the future video how to estimate this expected return. But let's say with your first fund you think you can generate I'm going to use numbers that I have off to the side because, oh wait, nope, I'm going to have to recalculate them. So 10.4% is too high, so I'm going to go 8.9% for the stock fund. And let's say that for the bond fund, we think we can generate 6.2%. And for the hybrid fund, which is a mix, let's say 7.1%. Now, I have no idea if these numbers will really happen. They're just my expectation. And again, I'll show you where to get those. But the weights I can control. So basically, if I have $100,000, I put 40,000 in the first fund, 25,000 in the second, and 35,000 in the third. To find the expected return, I'm just going to pop a calculator on screen. To find not the expected return, but the weighted return, I take the weight times the expected return. So for the first fund, I'd take 0.4 times 8.9, so 3.56 is the weighted return. And that's a percentage. I should have chosen numbers that I could just do the math in my head. For the second fund, it's going to be 25%. Oops, that's not what I meant to hit. 0.25 times 6.2, so 1.55%. And for the third fund, it's going to be 0.35 times the 7.1, 2.485. And then I'll just sum these three values to get my total weighted return. So it's going to be 2.485 plus the 1.55 plus 3.56, so 7.595. So this is the overall expected return for my investment. It's my vet investments, my entire portfolio. Now the reason not even though the first fund is expected to generate a higher return, I may not wish to put all my money in the first fund because it's all stock. So perhaps it's too risky for me and I'm unwilling to take that much risk. And I'll show you later in a spreadsheet in just a bit where you will use this number. So basically, this is the rate I expect to generate on my investments each year, assuming I maintain this weighting scheme. If this weighting scheme changes, whether, especially over time as I get older, I would probably reduce the weight in stocks, perhaps, and that's going to reduce the return number here. But as time changes, this expectation may change. Another important thing to consider is inflation. Inflation essentially erodes our purchasing power. So basically, $1,000 today will not buy the same thing as $1,000 in 10 years. 10 years of inflation is really going to reduce the purchasing power of $1,000. Historically, inflation from 1926 through about 2015, it's been about 3% annually. If I narrow this historical time period, if I actually look from 19 trying to line up those numbers 1950 to about 2015, it's a little bit higher, about 4% annually. And this is in the US. US actually has low rates of inflation. In some countries they're double digits. So I wanted to show y'all, well, actually, before I say this, if you look online, if you Google something like how much do I need to save for retirement or a retirement calculator, you'll find a lot of websites that let you input things like how old you are and how much money you make, etc. And they'll estimate how much you need to save every month or whether your current savings is enough. I I have tried all of those and I just never found one that I thought was comprehensive enough to satisfy me. So I wrote my own and I will post it under the lecture for this that I'm recording right now on the 216 website for you to use. And I mean, it's okay if you share it with your friends, just don't publish it. Leave this copyright in here. And there's some macros built into this website or spreadsheet, I mean. So you're going to have to enable the content to get that to work. I've also locked the spreadsheet because there are a lot of complicated formulas in here, and if you accidentally type into a cell that had a formula and you don't realize it and you can't undo it, it's going to cause problems. So in the locked stage, you can only type numbers into these bright green cells here. And there's just a notification that'll pop up and tell you that. This tab, the inputs tab, I don't know if you can actually see that inputs. I'm not sure if that portion of the screen is recording, but I think it is. The input tab in the bright green cells, that's where you enter your information. And then the spreadsheet does all of its math over here. Right now everything's essentially blank because I don't have any data typed into the input section. And then if you come over here to this purple section, it'll give you feedback and let you know how much you'll have saved at different points in your life. So, I don't know. I'm going to do some fake people. I'll call them Brian and Susan. And let's today I just want to enter the date the analysis was created. It actually uses this day to figure out the future dates and how old you'll be at certain points in time. So I'm going to enter today's date. And then let's say that Brian makes, I don't know, 70,000 a year and Susan makes 35,000 a year. Brian was born on, oh gosh, I don't know, April the 15th of 1973, and Susan was born August the 12th of 1974. Oops. I knew I knew there was it wants the younger person in column B, so I'm going to make Susan a little bit older than Brian. So that won't be a problem. So Brian's 42 and a half, Susan's 43. It obviously automatically calculates that based on this date that you inputted here and the birthdays that you input. The matching funds by employer. So let's say Brian works for an employer who matches him 50 cents for every dollar. So that would be entered as 50%. And Susan's employer matches her a dollar for every dollar. So I'll make that 100%. Let's say Brian contributes 7.5% of his income and Susan only contributes 5%. That's actually a bad idea since Susan's employer matches her dollar for dollar. She should contribute more than just 5% unless the match says we'll match you only up to 5% of your salary. Let's say Brian has, I don't know, 87,000. Don't put the comma. Excel will do that for you automatically. 87,000 in his retirement account and Susan has 25,000 in hers. Um, the Social Security monthly retirement amount in today's dollars, that you could go to the quick calculator that I showed you earlier in this video and pull that number, but we want it in today's dollars, not future dollars. So I'm actually going to pop back to that website. I still have that open, and I'm going to just go here to get back to that. Let me take a quick look at what I had done. So I'm going to estimate Brian's. I'm actually going to just pull this over here and hopefully that will still work. So Brian was 4/15/1973. He makes $70,000. I want it in today's dollars. So down here I'm leaving today's dollars. So at age 67, $2,162. So I'm going to pop that here. And then I would do the same thing for Susan. I just clicking there to get it to reset. So she was born 8/12/1972. She makes 35,000. Submit the request and she'll get $1,364. But I'm going to take another quick look. That's not what I meant to hit. Here we go. This will be in 2039. So at that point, Social Security is not expected to be fully funded. So in this particular row, and this is something none of the websites that I've played with retirement calculators let you do, but you can enter the likelihood that you'll receive full funding. Actually, that's not quite what I want you to enter. What I want you to enter in these two cells is the proportion of your full amount that you think you'll get. If you think Social Security will only pay 75 cents on the dollar by the time you're expected to collect this money, enter 75%. Actually, if you just start typing 75, it'll pop that percent sign up afterwards. And so maybe if Susan were a lot younger than Brian and she was going to retire further into the future than Brian was, then it's probably more likely Social Security would be less fully funded for Susan than it would be for Brian, so she could type in a smaller number or a larger number. But since they're about the same age, I'm going to put 75% for both of them. And then I had entered the 67, the amount they would get at age 67, so I'm putting that in there. And I'm going to click over here, and you can see that it's starting to fill out portions of the spreadsheet that weren't filled out before. And as I finish the spreadsheet, it will complete the projections tab. Now, the percent that you net from your paycheck after taxes, let's say, so Brian makes 70,000, that's his gross salary, but maybe he only nets 56,000 of his 70,000 after taxes. So that's the ratio that I need to know. So he only nets 80% of his salary after all his deductions. Let's say Susan makes 35,000, but she only nets 28,000. So I'm going to go 28 over 35. That'll give me Susan's. Oh, I was just making up those numbers and it turns out they're both 80%. Let's say they also have a supplemental savings account that's not part of their retirement savings, official retirement savings, and it's worth 5,000. And maybe they plan to add $100 a month to that. And let's say they just got it invested in a savings account, so it doesn't earn a high return. So they think they'll only earn a 0.5% on it. Finally, in this section, we need to decide what proportion of our current income we think we can live on during retirement. Like right now, 10% of my income is set aside for just for retirement. So, since once I retire, I won't need to put aside 10% of my income for retirement anymore. So, just dealing with that, I can live off 90% of my income. Um, 6.7% of my income right now goes towards Social Security taxes. Once I retire, I don't have to pay Social Security taxes any longer. So that money won't be money I need to live off of. So considering retirement and Social Security taxes, that's nearly 17% of my income that I don't need to worry about having deducted once I retire. Um, okay, that's kind of weird. But so what's that? 17, 100% minus 17, that's 83% of my income that I can probably live off of during retirement and be just fine. Also, maybe my expenses will fall. I won't be driving to work every day. Gasoline costs will drop. I won't need to wear, professional clothing, so perhaps my clothing allowance will fall. Things like that. So, experts say though you need to enter about 80 to 90% here to maintain your standard of living. I say it really just depends on your circumstances. Like in my case, I know I can drop down to 83% max and still be just fine. So if I lower my expenses a little bit more, then maybe I could live off 75% of my current income. So I'm just going to put that. If you think you're going to spend more money during retirement than you do now, then you need to up this to over 100. Now you need to enter your expectation for inflation. If you think inflation is going to be really high during the next few decades, enter a higher number here. I think it's probably going to be about 3%. And that's not, next year. That's on average each year for the next few decades. Now, let's say Brian works in an industry where there are a lot of raises. So, I mean, just as an example, I, for many years, like 6 years in a row, didn't get a raise because I work for a state funded institution and the state wasn't generating enough money in tax revenue to pay its employees raises. So hopefully you won't be in that situation. But let's say Brian works in an industry where they get about raises of about 2% a year. And let's say Susan gets a raise of about 1.5% a year. And I also need to input how old each of them expect to be when they retire. So let's say Brian's relatively unhealthy and he'd like to retire. Well, he's not that old, but let's say he wants to retire when he's 55. And Susan plans to work until she's 63. We also need to enter the returns they expect they can generate, and that hinges on this number. So, what you do is look at your investments, calculate the weights, the expected returns. I'll show you how to do all of that in a separate video, and then input this number for both Brian and Susan. You would perhaps have separate numbers for each of them. So, I'm just going to enter the 7.6. I'm going to round that for Brian. So, while he's still working, he thinks he can earn 7.6% on his investments. Now it's rounded it up to 8 in the display, but it's still using 7.6. Susan, let's say, is taking a more conservative approach to her retirement savings, and she doesn't think she can earn quite 7.6, maybe 6.8. Then after they retire, let's say they both shift their money to more conservative investments, and Brian's rate that he expects to earn drops down to 6.5, and Susan's down to just 5. I'm going to expand these a little bit. Hopefully, I can do that well. Uh, you know, because I've got the spreadsheet locked, it doesn't look like it's letting me do that. I just wanted to show the decimals, but they're there. And the tax rate during retirement. Now, together, Brian and Susan make what, $105,000. I forgot to open this before I started the recording the video too, but I'm going to enter in 2015 tax brackets just to show you, and hopefully it'll be a nice table. Hopefully we'll be able to find it. Uh, okay, here we go. So they're married individuals filing joint returns. That's wrapping kind of strangely. This one right here is for individual taxpayers. This one is for married individuals filing joint returns. So that's what Brian and Susan would be, and they make about 105,000, so they would fall in this category. Basically, the US has a progressive tax system, which means the less money you make, the lower the percentage of your income that you pay as taxes. So if you make in this range, 0 to 18,450, you would pay 10% of that as your taxable income, as your taxes, I mean. And if you fall in this next higher bracket, you would pay 10% of 18,450, which is 1,845, plus 15% of any money that you make over 18,000. And you can see as you fall into a higher and higher tax bracket, you will pay a greater percentage as taxes. They fall in this tax bracket. That means on some of their money they're going to pay 25% in taxes. Some of their money they're going to pay 15, and some they're going to pay 10. I'm just going to eyeball it and say that they're going to pay about 20% of their income in taxes. So I'm going to pop back over to the spreadsheet, and here in the anticipated tax bracket, and this is during retirement, but unless something changes drastically, they probably won't pay more in taxes during retirement than they do while they're working. They may even pay less. Now, the government, Congress, could certainly change the tax brackets drastically. They've been changed drastically in the past. We don't know right now, though, if that will happen. But if it becomes likely that it will, then you could increase these. And notice that I've made Susan's rate just automatically the same rate as Brian's. I'm assuming they're still filing joint returns. And then finally, enter the expiration date. I actually made this spreadsheet initially for some friends of mine who asked me to help them plan their retirement needs, and I didn't want to input how old do you think you'll be when you die. So I called it the expiration age, but that's really what it is. And when I built the spreadsheet, I did not program it so that you could live past age 90. And I really need to fix that, but I haven't. So enter a year of an age of 90 or less. Let's say Brian, I had mentioned that he was in poor health, so let's say he thinks he'll die when he's 84. Susan thinks she'll die when she's 89. Now, I'm just going to pop over here and you can see that it's filled out essentially everything. Right now, Brian's working, so he's not withdrawing any money. But once he hits his retirement age, which it's calculating based on the dates, he now starts withdrawing money from his retirement account. And then over here in the purple, I told it to, okay, look at them when the youngest person is 70, pop how much money they should have over here from the projections tab. So it's just tallying things and presenting them on one tab. And then I had it skip 5 years between here and here just because, for reasons I don't want to go into. But you can see they're in the negatives. A parentheses around a number means it's a negative number. So if they follow their current strategy, they're not going to be able to afford to live during retirement. Oops. So what they're going to have to do is make some changes. And I didn't mean to make it that small. I'm going to do this, and I can't remember how to do that. Zoom to selection. There we go. So hopefully you can still read this, even though it's a bit smaller. Because what I want to do is start making changes in these green cells that are changeable and see what it does to these numbers. Because what we want is this figure to be, if they want to leave, actually, we want it to go all the way down here. I'm not quite sure why it's not going down there. I need to figure out what's wrong. But what we want is a number down here that's equal to the legacy that Susan would like to leave when she finally passes away. I'm going to just, I don't know why that's happening. I'm not happy that there's an error. But the first change that we could make that would make a big difference is have Brian work a little bit longer. So if Brian works until he's 60 instead of 55, I haven't hit enter yet, so it hasn't changed any of the numbers. But when I hit enter, it's going to change the numbers on the projections tab, and it's going to then be pulling new numbers from the projections tab over here. And if Brian works for 5 more years, he'll build up more retirement savings, and he'll end up having fewer years that he's pulling money out of his retirement savings. So it should improve matters. I don't know that it'll make them great, but it should make them better. So it did improve things a decent amount, but there's still a problem. So let's have Susan work until she's 65, and let's actually have Brian work until he's 65. That helps a lot. We could also boost like Susan's percentage contribution. Instead of saving just 5% of her income, let's have her save 7.5%. That helps things a lot. If we boosted this up to 10%, that helps a tremendous amount. So again, I'm boosting the percentage that Susan saves from every paycheck that goes into her retirement account. So again, this is just to help plan. We can't be guaranteed that Susan will have this much money when she is 85 years old, but having some knowledge of what she might have is better than having absolutely no knowledge at all. Um, you could also have Susan make more aggressive investments, and maybe she can earn 8.5% instead of 7. Look at how much difference that made up here. It boosted that by about $400,000, I believe. And if she does that, maybe she can retire when she's 63. So the purpose of this spreadsheet is just to use it as a planning tool with the knowledge that it's not going to be absolutely perfect. But this is the same spreadsheet I use to plan for my own retirement. I do need to figure out why it's got blanks down here for these last 4 years, because this number, it should be pulling a number from the projection spreadsheet, but it isn't. So I will figure out why it's doing that and fix it, and then I'll post this spreadsheet to the course website.